Why aren't you eating dinner? My father-in-law asked. We were visiting him for New Year's after a long time. He probably noticed there was only enough food on the table for 3 people. It happens all the time, my mother-in-law said, chewing on the hamburger steak I made. What do you mean by that? My father-in-law looked at my mother-in-law and husband curiously. A daughter-in-law who can't give her mother-in-law grandchildren has to be a servant, right? My mother-in-law answered casually. That's right, Ruby is our servant. She stays in the kitchen to take care of us while we eat, she added. My husband sipped his beer and echoed her words. As expected, he always took me to his mother's house every weekend to help with chores, even though I couldn't give her grandchildren. He said, I'm letting you stay here, so you should appreciate my mom and do your best for her. I didn't want to go to my in-laws' house, but I felt I had to. Even if I said no, my husband would push me to go. He knew I got angry easily and struggled to express myself. Mom, I brought a servant. He recently greeted me like that. What do you mean? My father-in-law looked upset by the way my mother-in-law and husband talked about me. That's a normal family with kids. Ruby's infertility means I can't have grandchildren, he said. It's not your fault, Ruby. You shouldn't let them bully you. What do you mean? You live so far away, so stay out of it, my mother-in-law replied. That's right, Dad. Don't tell me what to do. You didn't have to watch Mom lose the chance to have grandchildren, my husband said. They sounded like they were teasing my father-in-law. I listened to them while grinding coffee beans. My mother-in-law and husband always asked me to bring them coffee right after they finished eating. I had been so busy shopping for my mother-in-law that I only had time to eat a piece of sweet bread earlier. Come on, I'm hungry too. I'm not sure what I'm doing, I thought. A single coffee bean fell to the floor as if trying to escape the grinder. My name is Ruby, and I'm a 37-year-old housewife. During lunch hours on weekdays, I work part-time in the kitchen of a family restaurant. My husband and I rent an apartment. I used to work at the same bank as my husband, but I left 3 years ago to focus on fertility treatment. We couldn't have children, so we sought medical help and found out the problem was on my side. After a year of treatment, I learned that it was impossible for me to get pregnant. My mother-in-law and husband changed after that. At first, we were both working and handling our own money, but when I quit my job, my husband took over our finances. He managed our savings, paid the rent and insurance, and started giving me money for living expenses. At first, we lived comfortably on $1,000 a month, but when we decided to stop fertility treatments, my husband said, "You can save money now." What do you mean? I asked. He explained that since we weren't trying to conceive anymore, I didn't need as much money. You can go back to work if you want, he said. He gradually reduced the money he gave me, first to $800 a month, then $600, and eventually $500. During that time, I desperately searched for a job, but my mother-in-law got in the way. She would say things like, "Working full-time isn't good for a wife. If you don't share the housework, I'll divorce you." So, I shouldn't work at all? I asked. If it's only part-time, that's fine. You need to take care of Carl and serve me, since you can't have grandchildren. It's the least you can do, she replied. It hurt to hear that having children was so important to her, especially after going through painful treatments myself. My mother-in-law started asking me for help more often. "My bathroom is dirty, come and clean it." "I'm going out to dinner with a friend," she'd say. She would frequently call and ask me to run errands. I worked every weekend at her house, and no matter what I did, she always complained. "Why are you folding laundry like that? Put the corners together and fold it properly. Do it again," she would say. Once, she even threw the folded laundry on the floor, almost like she enjoyed making me feel bad. After dinner, my father-in-law asked, "I'm going out for a drink. Do you want to join me?" He added, "If you don't want to, it's fine. I was just thinking about what happened during dinner." "You've been treated so badly by Elizabeth and Carl," my father-in-law said, and his words made me tear up. I couldn't help but cry. "If you want, you can vent to me," he offered. He took me to a local bar that was small, but clean and cozy. We sat at a table across from each other. He ordered a beer, and I ordered a whiskey soda. We also got some mixed nuts and a salad. "I could tell Elizabeth and Carl were being rude to you," my father-in-law started after taking a sip of his beer. I shared how poorly I'd been treated since I gave up on fertility treatments. "I'm blamed for not being able to have children, and I'm forced to run errands. My husband won't let me work full-time and has cut my living expenses. Now, he only gives me $500 a month. What I hate most is being called a slave." "I know, Elizabeth isn't happy unless she gets her way, he replied. She wasn't like this before, but she became selfish after having Carl. She yells at you so much that it's understandable to dislike her. Now you both pretend to be a happy couple. Do you think it's because he doesn't want to be with you? I'm jealous that you have a place to escape to, I admitted. You're not tough enough to make yourself heard, he said. Yeah, but talking to you makes me feel better, I replied. That's good. I'm happy to hear that. Before leaving the bar, we shared one more beer and whiskey soda. However, when I got back home, things took a turn. My husband and mother-in-law were standing there when I opened the door. Dad, did you have a night out with my wife? My husband asked, looking at both of us. I just invited Ruby for a drink, my father-in-law replied. What kind of relationship is this? You can't go out for drinks together, my mother-in-law shouted angrily. What do you think, Ruby? Isn't it wrong for a wife to go to a bar with a man? You can't give me grandchildren, but you still have desires. Both my husband and mother-in-law pointed at me. Enough, a powerful voice echoed through the room, startling everyone. My father-in-law was furious, staring at Carl and Elizabeth. What's wrong with you two? All I wanted was for Ruby to relax. My heart raced. It was clear that my normally mild-mannered father-in-law could become very difficult when he was angry. When he mentioned Elizabeth, she shuddered, probably scared of him or worried she had done something wrong. You said, what kind of relationship do you have with your father-in-law that you go out drinking together? Well, my daughter-in-law is treated like a slave, and I wanted to take her out to help her forget about it. Because of Ruby, I can't have grandchildren, my husband yelled. How can you say that when you hate children? I wanted to yell. My mother-in-law always blamed me for not giving her grandchildren, but aren't grandchildren different from other children? You don't really want grandchildren if you treat Ruby like this. You're just making excuses to blame her, my father-in-law said. My mother-in-law looked like she was about to argue, but then quickly looked away. Was she out of things to say or scared of her husband? Carl, wait. I heard you only give Ruby $500 a month for living expenses. Do you keep the rest of your salary? My father-in-law asked. No, I pay rent and insurance, Carl replied. Even so, I don't think that's all of your salary. My husband looked down and bit his lip, struggling to come up with an excuse. I came here to discuss our future. Let's get to it, my father-in-law said, leading us to the living room. What do you mean discuss our future? Carl and Elizabeth asked together. Just sit down, my father-in-law said. Make some coffee first, Ruby. Don't tell her what to do, my father-in-law yelled, making my mother-in-law shudder again. Make coffee for us and a cup for Ruby too. My mother-in-law nodded and sat quietly. My husband sat next to her, while I took a chair further from the table. I'll be retiring in a few years. After my current assignment ends, I won't be living with you anymore, my father-in-law said. What do you mean? Elizabeth and Carl asked together. Mr. Murphy looked at both of them. We've been pretending to be a couple for years, so we don't need to live together anymore. I'll live where I want, and you can stay here. That's fine, but after you accused me of being unfaithful earlier, I've changed my mind. I'm selling the house, he said. Elizabeth, I'll leave you, he added. What will I do? Where will I live? My mother-in-law was surprised and stood up. Just get a place of your own, my father-in-law said. How am I supposed to do that? I can't pay rent, she replied. Get Carl to help you, my father-in-law suggested. Carl stood up nervously, waving his hands. We don't have any money. If I do that, I won't be able to pay Mom's debt. Elizabeth gasped. My husband swallowed hard, but I heard him mention that Elizabeth was in debt. You just said debt, didn't you? My father-in-law said, sounding horrified. What do you mean by debt? Explain. I didn't mean it like that, Carl stammered. Explain, my father-in-law demanded. My mother-in-law started to cry when she heard his angry voice, but his rage didn't go away. Mom owes me $50,000. I'm her co-signer, Carl admitted, looking resigned. Around the time we stopped fertility treatments, my mother-in-law made an investment. At first, she made some money, but then the stock market crashed. You mean you lost money in the stock market and went into debt? I asked, surprised. I used family funds. We invested in stocks that were supposed to go up, but eventually, we got into debt. I'm paying it off with my salary, and Mama is repaying it by working part-time at a supermarket. This was news to me. I had never heard anything about stocks or debt before. My mother-in-law had lost a lot of money and borrowed more to make up for it when I stopped fertility treatments. She must have tried to pay back the debt by investing in stocks that didn't rise in value. I couldn't help but say what was on my mind. That's also when you and Carl began treating me like a slave. Ruby, what are you trying to say? Are you blaming me? My mother-in-law asked. The mistreatment started around the time I stopped fertility treatments, and I didn't think it was because she wanted a grandchild. It felt like she was taking out her frustrations on me because it was easier to do so. My mother-in-law stayed silent, as I expected. Carl had been using the money he took from my monthly allowance to pay off his debts. He didn't cut my expenses for some unknown reason. He just needed the money to help his mother. You stupid idiot, my father-in-law suddenly exploded. Even if it's family money, it's money I worked for. You put it into stocks without consulting me, and then you lost it? What kind of money management is this? After he yelled, my father-in-law left the room suddenly, as if he remembered something. We all followed him. What are you doing? He shouted. Show me Elizabeth's stuff. I want to see what she's buying. Stop, she cried out, but her husband ignored her and opened the closet door. The first thing I noticed was a luxury handbag. A quick glance showed at least 10 of them. Ruby, are these bags expensive? My father-in-law asked. They're all luxury items, costing over $1,000 each, I replied. He then opened a small drawer in the corner of the closet filled with accessories, rings, necklaces, and earrings, some with diamonds and rubies. I picked up a ring and saw it was made of 18-karat gold. Elizabeth, you bought all these expensive things without telling me, my father-in-law said, glaring at her. I'm sorry, she mumbled. Divorce, he yelled, turning to my husband in disgust. All this spending, investing in stocks without my permission, and treating Ruby like a slave. I want a divorce. I won't take no for an answer. How am I supposed to live? My mother-in-law asked, panicking. Talk to Carl. I'll sell this house and land immediately. You can sell these bags and jewelry to pay for the move, he shot back. My mother-in-law had no reply. My husband was sitting quietly, nodding and biting his lip. He no longer had the arrogant demeanor he used to have when he treated me like a slave. The next day, my father-in-law brought 2 sets of divorce papers. Here, Ruby, if you want to file for divorce too, you can. My father-in-law handed me one of the divorce papers. I looked at my husband, but he sighed and turned away. I definitely wanted a divorce, but I also wanted alimony from them. I thought a lot about my situation the night before. I had suffered for so long, and I realized I really wanted a child. The fertility treatments had been painful, but I endured them. In the end, I discovered I couldn't conceive. Holding back tears, I shared my story. All the painful tests and treatments I went through to become a mother were for nothing. I can't have a baby, no matter how hard I tried. As I was grieving, Carl told me he would reduce my living expenses since I didn't need fertility treatments anymore. What are you saying? This is all Carl's fault, I cried. My father-in-law looked horrified and told my mother-in-law to stop talking. She had blamed me for not giving her grandchildren and treated me like a slave. Do you know how hard it was for me? I asked. Of course, Elizabeth and Carl didn't have anything to say in response. In the end, Carl just needed money to pay off his debts, while Elizabeth took out her frustration on me after losing so much money in the stock market. I want you to reimburse me for this, I said. What if I say I won't pay? Carl replied. Then I'll talk to my lawyer, I said. My husband put his hand to his forehead and fell silent. After the new year, my father-in-law officially divorced my mother-in-law. When he put their house on the market, he found a buyer within a few days. The buyer wanted the land to build a new house, so they planned to tear down the old one first. With no place to stay, my mother-in-law moved into a rundown apartment that looked like it might collapse. Now, she lived with my ex-husband. Along with their living costs, they had to pay off their debts and alimony to me, which I knew must be very difficult for them. My mother-in-law worked at a supermarket during the day and had a part-time job at a pub at night. My husband also took on a second job on weekends at a wedding hall in addition to his regular job. They complained to everyone about how hard it was to pay their debts and alimony while seeing others around them happy. Meanwhile, I moved into a lovely little apartment and got a job thanks to my father-in-law. It was a clerical position at a security company where I could use my accounting knowledge and skills from my time at the bank. I want you to be happy. If you ever need help, just let me know, my father-in-law told me. He was on my side, and I was determined to do my best in this new chapter of my life. On the morning of my first day at work, I put on a new suit and made a promise to myself.
This is going to be our home now. The rest of the stuff is coming today, so please take care of it. What? Why are you making these decisions on your own? Oh, by the way, Anna is coming too, so make sure to welcome her. I had noticed that my husband's family started visiting more often after we moved into the fancy high-rise condo, but I never expected anything like this. As soon as my husband came home from work, I asked him, "Is your mother and her family going to live here?" "Oh yeah, that's happening today, isn't it?" he replied casually. "What are you talking about?" I was shocked. "Didn't I mention it? They're moving in with us today." "Haha," he laughed, not realizing how upset I was. I was speechless. "Don't just stand there. Get ready to make dinner. We're celebrating today." At that point, I was furious. How could he think this was okay? "We can live here because of me, you know," I said. "What are you talking about?" "That's not true," he argued back. As we were talking, my mother-in-law arrived. "If you hate living with us so much, why don't you just leave?" she said, throwing an envelope on the table. "What's this?" I asked. "It's severance money from us, $110,000. Take it, get divorced, and leave. We'll keep the house," she said, smirking with her family. At that moment, I made up my mind. They're such fools. I'm so lucky, I thought. "Understood. I'll leave right away," I said. I quickly packed my bags and left the house, feeling overjoyed. But this wasn't the end. I couldn't stop laughing, thinking about what would happen to my in-laws next. My name is Sarah, and I work as a bank employee. I thought I would have a happy life married to Kevin, but marriage doesn't always go as planned. I realized this when I first met my mother-in-law. "So, you're Sarah. What do you do for a living?" "I'm a bank employee," I replied. "Oh, a bank employee, huh? I guess you don't have to be too smart to do that," she said, clearly trying to put me down. This happened the first time we met before the wedding. Kevin, sitting next to me, acted like he didn't hear and just smoked his cigarette. "Well, let's get along from now on," she said. Yes, nice to meet you," I replied, wondering if everything would be okay. But after we got married, my husband was kind, and we didn't have to interact much with my mother-in-law. "Are you sure it was a good idea to marry a man with such a modest salary?" she asked out of nowhere one day. "What's wrong all of a sudden?" I asked. "Well, my mom used to say such things, but now I just feel pathetic." "It's okay, don't worry," I assured him. Kevin had always been insecure, even when we were dating. He was intimidated when he found out I was a bank employee, but I never cared much about my partner's financial status. Since then, we've had a modest but fun life. "What are you planning to do about where we live?" my father asked me a few months after we got married. "I think we're fine as we are now. We don't have any particular needs," I replied. "Actually, a spot has opened up in the high-rise condo. What do you think?" he asked. "A high-rise condo?" I was surprised. My father owned a high-rise condo. He was a company president, but had handed over the business to my brother and was now living a relaxed life. Of course, my husband knew about this. "If you're interested, you can move in immediately." "Got it. I'll discuss it with Kevin," I said. I talked to Kevin that night. "Kevin, are you interested in living in a high-rise condo?" "A high-rise condo? It would be amazing to live in such a place," Kevin said, showing excitement I hadn't seen before. Seeing him smile made me happy too. "Actually, my dad offered us to live in the high-rise condo." "Really?" "Yes," I replied. Kevin, overwhelmed with excitement, suddenly grabbed my shoulders. "Calm down a bit." Sorry, he said, realizing how excited he was. And so it was decided that we would live in the high-rise condo. However, for me, it was the beginning of a nightmare. "I'll contact Dad then, okay," I said. "Thanks, but I can't believe I'm going to live in a high-rise condo." Kevin's eyes sparkled. After getting Kevin's approval, I called my dad the next day. "Hello, Dad," Kevin agreed, so we decided to move in. "That's great. It's already cleaned and ready for you anytime." "Got it. Thank you," I replied. Then I remembered something important and asked my father, "By the way, how will we handle the rent?" "Don't worry about that. As long as you live there, you won't need to pay rent." "Really?" "Of course, it's all for my dear daughter." My husband and I started preparing to move right away. We moved in just 1 week later. Perhaps we were both excited to live in the high-rise condo. "So this is a high-rise condo. It's incredible. I never imagined we could live in such a place," Kevin said. "It's like a dream, all thanks to your father." "Indeed, we need to express our gratitude," Kevin replied. Although we were initially confused by the larger space of the high-rise condo, it only took a week to get used to it. I had concerns about whether someone like me should live there, but those concerns faded away. About 2 months after we started living in the high-rise condo, Kevin said, "My sister Anna wants to come visit. Is that okay?" Kevin had an older sister named Anna. I heard from Kevin that she had been married but got divorced because she was fed up with her husband and had returned to her parents' home. That's fine, but why does she want to come here? I asked. I hadn't really talked much with her before, so I didn't quite understand why she wanted to visit. I mentioned our new place, and she said she wanted to come over. That's fine as long as it's on the weekend, I replied. I'll let her know then. When Saturday arrived, the doorbell rang, and I went to open it. Standing there was a woman dressed head to toe in designer clothes. I was so surprised that I stepped back. It's been a while. Do you remember me? She asked. Of course, Anna. Please, come in. My sister-in-law walked in and started looking around the house, inspecting every corner. She checked each room, nodding like she was satisfied with something. Is there something on your mind? I asked, curious. I was just admiring the house. Ordinary people can't live in such a place, right? It's all thanks to my father, I explained. We moved to the living room and started chatting casually. Then, out of nowhere, my sister-in-law made a snide remark. At the time, I didn't understand why she said that. It must be nice to be you, Sarah. Don't you think so, Kevin? I don't really think about it, Kevin replied. But this house is all thanks to your father-in-law, right? I felt uneasy and asked, did I do something wrong? Not at all. It's just that our family wasn't wealthy, she replied. Kevin had told me before that their father had passed away when they were in middle school, and since then they had faced many hardships. I started to think maybe she was jealous of me. That might be why she was wearing all those designer clothes. Well, I'll be going now. I'll visit again soon. Take care. For about 2 hours, the conversation mainly revolved around their hardships and how lucky I was. Kevin barely spoke during the whole time, just silently listening to his sister. I'm sorry my sister is like that, Kevin said afterward. I kind of figured, I replied. I'll make sure to warn her next time, Kevin promised, but less than a month later, she visited us again, and this time she wasn't alone. Sorry for intruding, she said, barging in and plopping down on the sofa. Today I brought our mom along, but the door was locked. Oh, Kevin gave me a spare key, she said casually. What? I was shocked. I wanted to ask Kevin about it immediately, but he wasn't home. I had a bad feeling this was going to cause trouble. Then the most difficult person spoke up. It's not that big of a deal. What's the problem with having a spare key? The issue is that I wasn't informed about it, I replied. Maybe Kevin doesn't trust you, my mother-in-law said. I think so too, Anna chimed in. With both of them against me, I felt helpless. From that day on, my life became completely different. When I came home from work, I often found my sister-in-law and mother-in-law in the house. They would help themselves to the food in the fridge and move things around without asking. This isn't right, don't you think? I asked Kevin. Even if I say something, they won't listen. Maybe it's best to just let them do what they want, Kevin said. I can't stand living like this. Please talk to them. I was so frustrated with my husband for doing nothing and with myself for feeling powerless. Okay, I'll talk to them. Will you be there with me? Kevin asked. If you're going to speak up properly, then I don't mind, I replied. As usual, when my husband confronted them, they didn't pay any attention. Sarah must have put you up to this, right? Come on, Kevin, be more assertive, they said. That's right, you're the head of the household. You should have your own opinions, they added. My husband seemed to be thinking about something, looking down. Don't say weird things. Please leave, I finally told them. But then my husband unexpectedly turned against me. You're the one who should be quiet, he said. I was shocked. My husband was siding against me. He had completely given in to his mother and sister. They took advantage of Kevin's lack of confidence and his inability to say no. Now, I felt completely alone. I was wrong, my husband said with a new sense of confidence. What my sister and mother said is right. From now on, I'm going to express my own opinions. The two of them smirked and looked at us with satisfaction. From then on, things became one-sided. I've decided that my mom and sister can come and go as they please, my husband declared. Wait, you can't just make decisions like that without me, I protested. The decision is made, and you have no say in it, he replied, ignoring my concerns. His mother and sister backed him up. Sarah, that's enough, they said. Kevin is the head of this household. As his wife, you just need to follow him. There's a spare room, right? My mother-in-law asked. No way, I responded, but they continued. It's a waste to have an unused room, so we'll use it. The balance of power had clearly shifted in their favor. The room, which my father had allowed us to use, was now considered theirs. Given the situation, I had no choice but to tough it out. I decided to focus on my work and not worry about what was happening at home. 6 months later, my dedication to work paid off. You've been doing really well lately. How about taking on a higher position? My boss asked. Me? I've been watching your work. and I think you're the right person for the job. Thank you. I'll continue to do my best. It was unexpected but the happiest thing that had happened to me in a long time. However, there was a problem. You've been coming home late recently. What have you been up to? My husband asked suspiciously. Just work, really. Aren't you having an affair? If you don't believe me, go ahead and check, I replied. This was when my mother-in-law and sister-in-law would chime in. Getting so defensive makes you look even more suspicious, Anna said. Anna might be right, my mother-in-law added, but honestly, who would be interested in Sarah with her looks? They clapped their hands and laughed together, enjoying themselves at my expense. Before, they used to come over maybe 3 times a week, but now they were at our house almost every day. One day, my mother-in-law came up to me and said something completely unexpected. Do you even understand why you can live in a place like this? A woman like you doesn't belong here. I thought to myself, there she goes again. You can't even do household chores properly. You're useless here, do you get that? She continued. I wanted to snap back, but I knew that nothing I said would improve the situation, so I stayed silent. Eventually, my mother-in-law got bored and went back to her room. Just as I was about to start preparing dinner, my sister-in-law walked in. I heard the conversation earlier. There's never a moment of peace. You should really understand your place. You're like a maid in this house. I work hard too, you know, and I might sound bad, but I earn more than Kevin, I said. Then you should contribute that money to the household expenses for us, she shot back. I couldn't agree with her. I wasn't living in luxury. I was actually paying for most of our daily expenses like utilities and groceries. Kevin seemed to have forgotten that, and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law didn't even know the reality. I often wondered what would happen if I stopped paying. Then why don't you work, Anna? I asked. Why should I have to do that? She replied, completely serious. I almost envied her ability to say such things. It was a mystery where she went every day without working. So where do you go every day? I asked. I don't need to tell you that, she said, avoiding eye contact. It was clear she was involved in something she couldn't openly talk about. Is that so? Then I'll just assume you're wandering around every day without working, I said seriously. Angered, my sister-in-law threw a mug from the table at me. It didn't hit me, but the mug shattered into pieces. Why did you dodge that? That was my favorite cup. Since it's your fault, clean it up, she demanded. I silently began cleaning up the broken pieces while she stood there watching and laughing. I thought about throwing the shards back at her, but I refrained. You're in the way standing there, she said. I'm just watching, she added as I cleaned up. After a few minutes, I tried to leave, but my sister-in-law stopped me again. Remember, if you say something weird next time, it'll be much worse. I understand. I'll be careful, I said, though I didn't mean it inside. As I watched my sister-in-law leave, I thought to myself, don't get too cocky, you'll get what's coming to you soon. Then one day, as usual, when I returned home from shopping, the house was in chaos. There were cardboard boxes everywhere and my mother-in-law was bustling around. What are you doing? I asked. This is going to be our home now. The rest of our stuff is arriving today, so please take care of it, she said. What? Why are you deciding this on your own? I asked, shocked. Oh, by the way, Anna will be coming too. Please welcome her. I immediately asked my husband, who had just returned from work, your mother and her family are saying they're going to live here. Oh yeah, that was today, wasn't it? What are you talking about? Huh? Didn't I mention it? They're moving in with us today, he said, laughing. I was dumbfounded. I couldn't think of what to say next. Don't just stand there. Get ready to make dinner. We're celebrating today, he added. At those words, my anger reached its peak. How can this be allowed? After all, we can live here thanks to me? Huh? What are you talking about? That's not true, he replied. Are you serious? You're just obeying everything your family says, I said. What did you say? Say that again, my husband said, raising his hand toward me. At that moment, it wasn't fear that I felt. I was shocked at how much my husband had changed, going from unassertive to someone who might hit me, but I wasn't scared. I was in disbelief. Go ahead, hit me if you dare, I said. He slowly lowered his arm, apparently intimidated, but then started laughing. What's so funny? I asked. I just remembered why we got married. You should be thankful you could marry me, he replied, laughing. What are you talking about? You might not know this, but I married you because nobody else was interested. I didn't marry you out of love. It's annoying, but I did it because you earn more than me. That's what Mom told me to do, he said. Anger boiled up inside me. So that was the reason, I thought. He continued, since you're married to someone like me, it's only natural for you to contribute to the living expenses. Ever since we got married, I had always been the one providing the money whenever needed. I never thought my husband was such a terrible person. That's mutual. You only bring home money. I never thought you could be so boring, he retorted. As we argued, my mother-in-law arrived. "If you hate living together so much, why don't you just leave?" she said. "Why should I have to do that?" I asked. "We don't need someone like you in this place," she said. My sister-in-law agreed. "Sarah is unnecessary. Nothing will change if you're gone." My mother-in-law then threw an envelope on the table. "What is this?" I asked. "It's severance money from us. There's $10,000 in the envelope. Take it, get divorced, and leave. We'll take the house," she said, smirking. At that moment, I made up my mind. The high-rise condo we were living in was technically in my name, though I was only borrowing it for free from my father. I thought of a way to retaliate against them. Such foolish people, I thought. This is an opportunity for me. I decided to act immediately. "Understood. I'll leave right away," I said. "I thought you would put up more of a fight," my husband sneered. Well, that's the kind of woman she was. "Too bad, but I don't want to see your face anymore, so leave quickly," my mother-in-law added. I quickly packed my bags and left the house, almost dancing with glee. I couldn't stop laughing as I imagined what would happen to my in-laws next. I decided to go back to my parents' house to inform my father about the situation. "Why have you come back suddenly?" my father asked. "I've been kicked out of the house," I replied. "Kicked out? How did that happen?" he asked, concerned. I explained everything that had happened that day and the events leading up to it. My father's face turned red with anger as I spoke. After I finished, he was angrier than I had ever seen him. "Let's kick them out immediately," he said, but I stopped him. "Wait, Dad. I have a better idea," I said. "What kind of idea?" he asked. I shared the plan I had thought of when leaving the house. My father nodded in agreement. "That's a brilliant idea, right? This way it benefits you as well, and I get my revenge. So you'll take care of it." "Yes, don't worry," he assured me. The next day, I contacted my husband about the apartment. "I have no intention of giving it back," I told him. "I know, but the ownership is still mine, so I'm thinking of transferring it to you. Then it will truly be yours, right?" "I see. I don't want to cause you any trouble. I'll handle the paperwork. Is that okay?" "Okay, I'll leave it to you," he agreed. "All right, I'll also send the divorce papers by mail." "Take care," I said, hanging up the phone. I could sense my husband's joy just before I hung up. A week later, the divorce was finalized and the paperwork for the high-rise condo was completed. All that was left was to wait. "Hey, I got a bill for $6,000. What's the meaning of this? Explain." My furious ex-husband called me a month later. It was hard to suppress my laughter at his reaction. "Well, it's a high-rise condo, you know. Did you think you could live there for free?" "But the rent was free until now, wasn't it?" "Indeed, when I was there," I laughed. "This is no joke," he shouted so loudly that I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "It was free because I was there. But now that it's yours, you need to pay the rent." "We're not going to pay that." "You can choose not to, but remember, the owner of the apartment is my father," I reminded him. After a moment of silence, my mother-in-law took the phone. "I heard from Kevin what you did. That was unnecessary of you." "Unnecessary? I believe what I did was entirely justified. Please don't be mistaken," I responded. "What an impudent woman you are," she said angrily. "It doesn't matter to me. Haha. You shouldn't have given me $10,000 then," I provoked her. I thought I wouldn't have to deal with them anymore, but my words got to her. "We will absolutely not pay," she said. "Is that so? That's fine by me, but don't say I didn't warn you if my father decides to sue," I replied. My mother-in-law seemed shaken, losing her previous confidence. "Aren't you ashamed to rely on your father?" "Not at all. It's more shameful for someone who tried to manipulate their son to their own ends, don't you think?" I said. Realizing she was at a disadvantage, my mother-in-law abruptly hung up the phone. She was just running away. I immediately informed my father about the conversation. "I see that I need to do something about it for my daughter," he said. "I'm counting on you," I replied. My former in-laws acted impulsively, thinking only of their convenience, and this was the result. Such a pitiful family. They would face more difficulties from now on, and I would just wait and enjoy watching. Time passed, and my ex-husband and his family continued living in the high-rise condo without paying rent. Eventually, my father had to take action. "I just billed them for the past due rent," he said. "Really? We can't ignore this any longer. It will be a good lesson for them," I replied. Then a new revelation came to light. There were traces of unauthorized purchases made with a credit card in my name. A lawyer introduced by my father was hired, and preparations for a lawsuit began, demanding reimbursement from my ex-husband and his family. "Why should we pay you?" My sister-in-law objected, mostly because the purchases were expensive branded bags and clothes. "How can you say that after shopping with someone else's money? This is clear theft," I said. "It's pathetic to fuss over such trivial matters. Besides, those purchases were made before your divorce, so I think they're invalid," she argued. Unfortunately, that logic doesn't apply. You and I are strangers now, I said. I don't care about that, she replied, but then she hung up, escaping as usual. However, they couldn't escape this time and had to make the payment. They must pay the rent for the apartment, but that family doesn't have the means to pay. One person eventually came begging for forgiveness. What are you saying now? We can't afford to pay such an amount. We'd be ruined even if we took out loans. You understand, right? My mother-in-law was trying to get sympathy through tears. It's all your responsibility. Aren't you ashamed? I asked, knowing she was fully aware of the situation. It's impossible. Please make sure to pay the full amount, I insisted. Afterward, it seems they continued to live in poverty. The three of them, having lost their place to live, returned to their old family home, which was in a dilapidated state due to neglect. Eventually, they realized they needed more money to live and decided to sell it for a cheap price. Sarah, please help me. I received a call from my ex-husband Kevin, but I ignored it and hung up. In the end, I was able to live in the high-rise condo they had left. Of course, I didn't have to pay any rent. My work was going well, and from now on, I would live my life putting my happiness first.
My wife, a 31-year-old woman, firmly believes that I, a 35-year-old man, should have received a promotion by now, given that I've been working in the same position for the past 7 years. Her frustration began to surface after 5 years in this job, when she started making sarcastic remarks. She would often compare my situation to her friend's husband, who got promotion after just 2 years, and her sister's fiancé, who secured a position after only 3 years at their respective jobs. Ironically, she's been working in retail for 9 years, but has never had the opportunity to move up in her career. I suspect that her constant need to one-up others plays a role in her expectations. For instance, if one of her friend's spouses buys them an expensive item, she expects me to follow suit, simply because others have done so. Unfortunately, we're all too aware of the challenging economic situation in the United States due to the significant increase in prices over the past years. While I do my best to make my wife feel special, there are times when her demands seem excessive, especially when we can't afford such extravagances. Her disappointment with me grew over the past 2 months. Her closest friend received a new car for her birthday from her husband, and my wife expected the same from me. I had to remind her that I was still paying off the last car I bought her. This led to her giving me the cold shoulder, and our communication became sporadic at best. We exchanged greetings when we crossed paths, but that was the extent of it. I slept in the guest room and refused to indulge her because, at this point, I felt she could buy her own car. She believed that giving me the silent treatment would compel me to meet her demands. But when that didn't happen, she stopped talking to me altogether. Then, last week, I came home early from work. I had informed her that I'd be coming home at this time from now on, although she didn't inquire why. I had been prepared to explain my reason if she had asked. Instead, she continued to ignore me. The following day, while wiping the kitchen counter, I noticed her phone near the toaster. It appeared that she had forgotten it while running errands. I was about to leave it there when her phone lit up with an incoming message. Glancing down, I saw that it was from her friend, who inquired if my wife was certain about her earlier response. To my shock, my wife's previous message stated that she was leaving me because I was losing my job, and she couldn't tolerate it any longer. She added that there was no reason for her to stay, and our marriage had become pointless in our lives. I must admit, I was deeply hurt by her words. I never considered our marriage pointless, but it seemed that my wife viewed it as a one-sided relationship, with her taking more than giving. Her assumption that I was losing my job simply because I mentioned coming home early was a typical reaction for her. She always made assumptions without asking questions, so I decided not to inform her about my recent promotion, which came with a substantial pay increase and reduced work hours because I was now managing my own team. I preferred to remain silent and let her think what she wanted. 2 days after I stumbled upon her text messages, she came downstairs while I was preparing dinner, with 2 suitcases packed. and announced that she was going to stay with her closest friend for a while to sort things out. I inquired about her intentions, and she explained that she believed our marriage was no longer working, and she wasn't happy. I respected her decision to leave and continued with my evening. The next day, my first paycheck with the pay increase hit my account, and I was astounded by the amount of money I would now be earning. I contacted my good friend, her closest friend's husband, and suggested we go car shopping together. He picked me up, and we drove to the dealership. After choosing a car I liked, I drove away in my new vehicle. We had lunch together before parting ways to our respective homes. I suspected he might have mentioned my new car and the money I spent on it to his wife, or that my wife was present during the conversation. All of a sudden, my wife called my phone. I didn't answer the first call and let her call 2 more times before picking up on the third ring. She asked if it was true that I had purchased an expensive new car, and I confirmed that I had. She then questioned how I could afford it after I had been laid off. I inquired when she thought I had been laid off, and she seemed perplexed because she had assumed I had lost my job. I explained that I could afford the car due to my recent promotion. After a moment of silence, she suddenly exclaimed her congratulations and suggested we celebrate that evening. Confused, I reminded her of her earlier statement about our marriage being pointless and her desire to leave. She stuttered, attempting to come up with excuses, but I assured her it was all right and that I was fine celebrating alone. When she insisted on seeing me, I hesitated, explaining that it didn't seem wise considering her earlier feelings about our marriage. I believed she should stand by her initial decision. In response, she called me heartless and accused me of never loving her. She burst into tears and abruptly hung up, leaving me wondering if I was wrong for my actions. Was I wrong to distance myself from her, especially considering her sudden interest in my life, seemingly sparked by my new car and promotion? It has been 2 days since my last post, and things have taken an unexpected turn. My wife has completely changed her demeanor, shifting from indifference to intense concern about my well-being. She has bombarded my phone with calls and texts, ranging from threats of divorce to accusations of infidelity. I found myself surprised at her sudden interest in my actions, considering her previous lack of concern. She expressed a desire to come home, but I stood my ground, reminding her that she was the one who chose to leave. I couldn't understand why she expected me to beg her to return. I firmly stated that I shouldn't have to fight for our marriage alone, as marriage is a partnership, and I didn't make those vows alone before the priests. I reminded her that she was the one who essentially declared our marriage was over and had reached its end, not me. I refused to stay in a marriage with someone who expressed such sentiments. I told her plainly that I wouldn't engage in conversations if all she intended to do was complain like a spoiled child. Of course, she didn't appreciate my bluntness and hung up on me. It's been a week and a half since the last update, and I'm seriously considering filing for divorce. Initially, I contemplated filing for separation, hoping to spare her from embarrassment, until she created the scene at my family dinner. I had invited her, giving her a chance to attend without informing my family about our living situation. I wanted to shield her from her recent inappropriate behavior and decisions. However, during the dinner, as we discussed various topics, I complimented my mom for her unwavering support for my dad, especially since he was currently using crutches due to a broken leg. My wife chose that moment to interject, expressing her desire for me to be as supportive as my parents were for each other. Fed up, I confronted her, asking if I was a bad husband simply because I didn't cater to her every whim or because I wasn't constantly pleading for her return. In front of my family, I revealed how she had been mistreating me, assuming I had lost my job without discussing it with me first. I shared how she had moved out, claiming our marriage was pointless and practically over. When my family questioned her, she tried to turn the situation around, suggesting she was trying to salvage our marriage. But I had been mistreating her ever since my promotion. I pointed out that she only wanted the marriage now because I was making significantly more money, and she wanted to enjoy the benefits. She began crying, portraying herself as the victim, and accused me of trying to leave her for a younger woman. My parents became upset, thinking I was pushing her out to make room for someone else due to my recent promotion. I chuckled and handed them my phone so they could see our text messages and understand the truth of the situation. Up until 2 months ago, she had been treating me horribly, speaking to me in a way that my sisters were ready to confront her about. When she tried to paint me as the villain in front of my parents, I was furious. That moment, I told her I was completely done with her. I reminded her about the marital agreement we had signed. I made it clear that since she had made the first move to dissolve the marriage by moving out and expressing her exhaustion with our relationship the following day, she was entitled to nothing. Despite her desperate pleas for another chance, I was ready for it to be over. I wanted to move on and find someone who valued me for who I am, not for my money. She was delusional for thinking she could leave me, try to guilt-trip me into taking her back, and then expect everything to be okay. I'm glad you're looking at this situation positively and choosing to move forward without her. It's evident that her effort only increased because you got a promotion. You deserve someone who appreciates you for who you are, not for your success. As for my own struggles, I've always found it challenging to pay attention and focus on things I find boring. Managing deadlines, waking up, and falling asleep have always been difficult for me, and my memory is incredibly weak. Somehow, I managed to get through high school and even secured a spot in my dream university, although I felt it was more due to luck than my efforts. I often skipped classes at the community college, using excuses to mask the fact that I was sleeping in. This behavior made me feel awful about myself, fearing that if anyone discovered my laziness, they would hate me and think I was a failure. My self-esteem took a severe hit, and I developed imposter syndrome, general anxiety disorder, and an eating disorder due to my self-loathing. When university started, it became even harder to maintain my grades. Despite my best efforts, I kept missing deadlines, struggled to pay attention in class, and found it nearly impossible to focus on my studies. I tried everything: attending learning skill classes, reading every self-help book, locking myself in my dorm room, but I still felt like I was falling short academically. I was at an all-time low mentally until I stumbled upon an article about ADHD that felt like it was narrating my life story. Every little symptom described seemed to fit me perfectly. This discovery gave me newfound hope that I could get help. Fortunately, I was still covered by my parents' insurance. I promptly consulted a neurologist, which cost me $50, a detail that might become significant later on. The neurologist confirmed it was a classic case of ADHD and also diagnosed a memory problem. He provided me with a comprehensive treatment plan, including medication. I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and validation. Yesterday, I took half a pill for the first time, and it was a transformative experience. It was as if someone had turned off a loud noise that I hadn't even realized was there. I'd never felt so focused and calm in my entire life. Excited, I called my family to share the news. However, my mom abruptly interrupted me, asking me to bring her some pills when I got home. My father chimed in, suggesting that my 16-year-old brother, who likely had a more severe case of ADHD than mine, should try them too, as he was struggling to maintain his grades. I was deeply uncomfortable with their request and suggested they consult a doctor themselves since it wasn't expensive and the wait times weren't long. But they brushed it off, insisting that ADHD medication was common nowadays, with people obtaining them from friends. And if it worked so well for me, why wouldn't I want the same for them? They claimed I was being overly uptight and making a fuss out of nothing. I'm torn because I understand people often share these medications, but I'm worried about the legality and potential consequences. Additionally, I fear running out when I need them, which might sound selfish. I want to emphasize that my brother is completely unaware of this situation and is the sweetest young boy who would never pressure anyone for anything. I want to express my gratitude to everyone for their supportive comments. I wish I could respond to each one individually, but please know that I've read them all. Your positivity has genuinely made my day, and helped me feel better about my situation. Thank you for your kindness. I want to clarify that I never seriously considered sharing the medication. My post was more about my conflicted feelings regarding their request. Under no circumstances should you give away your prescription meds. ADHD medications are controlled substances, and running out before the prescribed time could lead to suspicion of illegal activity. Selling them or sharing them with family members could get you into serious trouble. If you fear someone might steal them, consider using a lockbox. It's unwise to share prescription medications. Your family members should consult a doctor for their own diagnosis and treatments. Introducing new medications without supervision might lead to harmful interactions. A couple of months before my grandmother passed away, I drove down to see her with my dad. Despite my initial belief that she disliked me due to my past mistakes, she gave me her wedding ring among other things, mentioning that I was her light and always there for her without being asked. During my visit, I learned about my grandfather's infidelity, and I assumed she gave me the ring instead of leaving it for him because she wanted him to have someone after her passing. I facilitated a reconciliation, but after her death, my cousin asked me to return the ring to my grandfather. I refused, believing that if she intended him to have it, she would have left it for him. Am I in the wrong here? Morally, you're not at fault. It was a gift freely given. However, you might want to check the legalities in your area, as sometimes gifts given shortly before death can be contested as part of the inheritance. Be prepared for relatives to try to guilt you into giving it back. But remember, your grandmother's intentions matter, and it's not your responsibility to fulfill someone else's assumptions about her relationship with your grandfather. Unlock this door. Have you lost your mind? They're probably saying that on the other side of this thick door, but I can't hear them, and frankly, I don't need their forgiveness. Facing the three flustered fools on the other side, I waved with a smile and said, "Let's go. Wonder if you can make it back safely. Good luck." My name is Leah, a 30-year-old officer worker. I'm a newlywed, married for just a year with no kids yet. Back when I was single, my hobby was taking day trips using the train on my days off. Friends would ask, "Don't you get lonely traveling alone?" But I found it surprisingly pleasant to move at my own pace without a fixed schedule. There's a bit of loneliness, but the fun outweighs it. I have a favorite travel magazine, and sometimes I plan trips based on it. As I went about my days, I noticed something. Hug, isn't that the same guy I saw last week? It seemed coincidental, but after the third time, I might have thought it was fate if I were romantic. Instead, I just felt a bit scared, but it turned out he felt the same. Sorry if I'm mistaken, but didn't we meet last week and the week before at completely different places? He approached me with a slightly scared look. Wait, do you think I'm following you? To clear up the misunderstanding, I opened my travel magazine and confidently said, "I'm just traveling based on this magazine." Surprised, he responded, "Me too," and opened the same magazine, smiling happily. That's how I met my husband, Henry. He turned out to be a really interesting guy. Being cautious by nature, I always end up carrying a lot of stuff, but he said, "I always travel light so I can move easily. Nowadays, with cashless payments, you hardly need cash. A mobile phone is enough." He laughed joyfully. Talking with someone with such different values was very stimulating. We hit it off, discussing our favorite travel destinations and exchanged contacts. Though we both liked solo trips, we started going out together more often. Surprisingly, I enjoyed sharing memories with someone else, and I found that local food tastes even better when shared. One day, after about 6 months, Henry asked me to go out. I didn't feel bad at all. In fact, I felt the same way and remember being very happy. We decided to get married 6 months into our relationship. I thought our happy newlywed life was just beginning, but my expectations quickly shattered due to Henry's parents, Jack and Aaliyah. Their house is about a 30-minute drive from ours. They are still in their 50s, with Aita working part-time, and both of them are employed. Initially, they used to visit our house, but lately, we've managed to maintain a reasonable distance. However, an incident occurred that disrupted this balance. "Hey, Henry, let's go here on our next day off." "I agree. Sounds good." Our post-marriage tradition of many trips to tourist spots continued as usual. Minimalist Henry recently reduced his belongings to just a mobile phone, even entrusting his wallet to me. It feels so light. "I don't look like someone who's about to go out at all, do I?" he said with a contented smile. I thought to myself, at least carry your own wallet. But it wasn't really a bother. It was an ordinary conversation, but that day was different. "Oh, by the way, Dad and Mom's wedding anniversary is coming up soon. How about we invite my parents on our next trip?" Henry's sudden suggestion made me tense up. Of course, there was a reason for that, but I couldn't just say no. So I responded, "Yeah, that sounds good. We haven't seen Aita and Jack recently anyway." Unaware of my slightly strained face, Henry didn't notice a thing. The next day, they were really looking forward to it. When I called, he told me, "I guess I have to give it my best shot." So I steeled myself. Honestly, I'm not comfortable around my parents-in-law. They're not bad people, we're just not a good fit. I'm more on the reserved side, not fond of noisy places, and this applies to people too. Talking to high-energy people can be mentally exhausting for me. Speaking of my parents-in-law, they are incredibly cheerful. When I first met them, their exuberance overwhelmed me. "Nice to meet you. I'm Henry's mom, and I'm the dad," they announced loudly, like comedians, making me stiffen up involuntarily. That time, the four of us, including Henry and his parents, went out to eat, and they chose the restaurant. I wondered if it's their favorite place, but when we got there, it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. Meeting their son's girlfriend for the first time at such a casual place made me laugh. "We're so nervous today. We haven't eaten anything since morning," Aita, who didn't seem nervous at all, said cheerfully to me. That's right. Plus, we have to get our money's worth." The true reason for skipping breakfast was quickly revealed by Jack. Their loud voices attracted quiet laughter from nearby tables. Embarrassed by then and wanting to go home, looking sideways, thinking Henry must feel the same, I was surprised to find he wasn't there. He had gone to get food. Not to be outdone, the parents-in-law also got up, piling their plates with food. Are they planning to hibernate after eating so much? Can I really become part of this family? I managed only a forced smile at their overwhelming presence. I barely ate that day, nervous as I was, feeling uncertain about the future with Henry. I was touched when they said at parting, "What a wonderful girlfriend Henry has. He may be awkward, but please take care of Henry from now on, Leia." I was simply happy to hear that. I loved him too, and I thought the parents-in-law weren't bad at heart. So, when he proposed a few months later, I faced no hesitation, but it turns out I'm not adept at judging people. At our wedding, the bridegroom's parents, my parents-in-law, completely disregarded the ceremony and focused solely on eating, leaving my own parents utterly disillusioned. Henry has a brother, Jonathan, who seemed to be the only sensible one. I'm sorry my parents showed such an embarrassing side. It's really shameful. Jonathan came to greet us politely. As I heard from my parents, Jonathan, who lives alone, seems to have a strained relationship with his parents. It appears the feeling is mutual, as they once complained. That boy is always so noisy with his complaints. Just the other day, he bragged about buying several eggs when it was limited to one per person. And I scolded him for it. Seemingly annoyed, he replied, "Don't you feel guilty about benefiting yourself at the expense of others?" Hearing this story, I thought to myself, isn't that a fair point? What's wrong with that, Aita? I honestly felt that way when the parents-in-law came to visit our new home. They arrived empty-handed, which wasn't a problem. But then they started rummaging through our shelves, exclaiming, "Isn't this the snack they're advertising on TV? I've been wanting to try it. Oh, and this one too. They foraged through my hidden snacks like they were on a treasure hunt. Even though I bought those snacks, Henry, without any malice, said, "If you want them, take them home." "That's fine, right, Leah?" I wanted to smack him right then and there. All I could do was respond with a forced smile. I had a suspicion, but it was clear now. The parents-in-law were moochers. "I want this. I want that. Give me, give me." In the early days of our marriage, they came over every week, sensing an opportunity, and I was almost driven to neurosis. "Hey, don't you think there's something off about Aliyah and Jack? They're kind of annoying." My anger exploded, and I ended up fighting with Henry. Despite how angry I was, Henry looked puzzled and said, "No, not really. Is it that strange? They've been like that since I was a kid." "Don't worry about it," he said, patting my shoulder lightly, which made me furious. "Are you kidding me? If this keeps up, I'll divorce you. Just do whatever you want." My raised voice seemed to alarm Henry, and he quickly put an end to the parents-in-law's invasions. I don't know what Henry said to them, but since then, we've been living peacefully. However, the thought of traveling with the parents-in-law naturally made me anxious on the day of the trip. I was taken aback to see them waiting. "It's been a while, Lee. I heard you've been busy with work. Must be tough." Aliyah spoke to me, but I was far from calm. The reason lay in the appearance of the parents-in-law. Aliyah and Jack, where's your luggage?" Looking closely, Aliyah and Jack had brought nothing with them, even for a day trip. Isn't it normal to bring at least a bag? We wanted to be ready to move quickly, and I have a sore shoulder. Their response echoed something I'd heard before, and it was baffling. The rest of the trip went as badly as I feared. It was soon revealed that the parents-in-law had forgotten their wallets. Feigning ignorance, they said, "That's strange, isn't it?" Watching them play dumb, I thought, maybe it's better to just call off this trip or even cancel it. "Yeah, unfortunately, my feelings weren't understood," Henry, looking exasperated, said again. "My folks have always been like this. I'll cover for them, but make sure they pay me back." It seemed the trip would continue as the parents-in-law laughed and apologized. All I felt was disgust. Even after we arrived at our destination, the parents-in-law's rudeness didn't stop. They complained to the store staff. "Isn't there any free tasting? Wow, stingy, huh?" When I, feeling thirsty, bought a drink and hadn't even taken a sip yet, Aliyah said, "Can I have a sip of that? I'm thirsty too." "I can't believe I forgot my wallet, pa." While I forced a smile, an exasperated Henry intervened. "Stop it. It's embarrassing. Look, I'll buy you one." Overhearing this, Jack muttered under his breath, referring to me. What a stingy woman, lacking compassion. I didn't miss his comment. I could say the same to you. I should have left at that point, but I was a bit stubborn. A similar incident happened twice more afterward. Apparently, the first trip was so enjoyable that Aliyah contacted Henry for another. When I saw them on the station platform, I couldn't help but feel chills. The second time they brought their wallets, but when the moment came, oh no, this is the wallet I used before. I rushed out in such a hurry. Their obvious lie was something only Henry would believe. And on the third trip, they forgot their wallets again. By then, it was clear it was a deliberate act. Aliyah, excuse me, but did you deliberately forget your wallet? You never intended to pay, did you? I hit the nail on the head, and her face turned red. Hey, what a rude woman you are. Apologize to Aliyah. Jack glared at me, demanding an apology. No way. I've thought this for a long time. Both of you are just too greedy. Caught in the argument with the parents-in-law, Henry seemed at a loss. Tourists around us watched curiously, noticing their gaze. Henry seemed to feel ashamed and finally said, "Stop it, please," breaking down crying. I felt truly disillusioned, but the parents-in-law reacted differently. Rushing to a crying Henry, Aliyah said, "I'm sorry, Henry. It was my fault." "You're so kind to cry for me," with Jack quietly standing beside her. I didn't know how to react to this farce. Only one thought came to mind. Yeah, this is impossible. Let's get a divorce. That was all I could think, seeing Henry's tears. The parents-in-law seemed to lose their fighting spirit. Leah, we know we're often in the wrong. It's Henry's money. But still, we've taken advantage of him. It's Henry's money after all. I don't know why they said it twice, but their words, dripping with sarcasm, showed no real remorse. And so, it was confirmed that they had deliberately forgotten their wallets. Alia referred to it as Henry's money, but we both work, and his salary is only slightly higher than mine. Our actual incomes are not much different. Recently, every trip with the parents-in-law ended with, "I want to buy this too. Maybe some gifts for the neighbors as well. What's that? Looks tasty. Hey, Henry, buy that for me." Because of their endless demands, Henry's credit card bills were shockingly high. We've been living mostly on my salary for the past few months. At the time of marriage, I considered it family money and believed in spending within the limits of our allowance for personal desires. Don't be a burden to your partner. The thing that infuriated me the most was when cashless reliant Henry exclaimed at our travel destination, "What, only cash here?" He called me over, pulled his wallet out of my bag. It only had a few dollars in coins. "No, I messed up. You know I don't carry cash, right?" he said without malice. It still makes me furious thinking about it. For the record, I always paid for my own things, yet the parents-in-law probably thought I was living off Henry's money and just complaining. We split living expenses, so such accusations were nothing but unpleasant. Thinking all this, I coldly watched Henry crying and Jack consoling him. After a moment of thought, I said, "I was wrong too. Sorry for being presumptuous. You guys go ahead on the train. I'll buy some drinks and follow." I smiled calmly, and Henry and the parents-in-law happily boarded the train. Their smiles turned to panic a few minutes later when I didn't return. Henry must have felt something was off as he messaged me, "Leah, are you coming? The train is about to leave." Right then, the heavy doors slowly closed from the platform. I had a clear view of Henry's panicked face. It seemed he noticed me and was shouting something. I was replying to his earlier message, "I'm divorcing you. If your parents are so important, live happily with them. Goodbye." I ignored his calls, thinking, doesn't he care about being a nuisance on the train? Keys. He sent several messages afterward, but I ignored them all. Henry's face through the door slowly turned to anger. "Hey, open this door. Are you crazy? I won't forgive you," he said, as if I needed his permission. The parents-in-law seemed to be yelling too, but of course, I couldn't hear them. Smiling at the three fools, I said, "Let's go. Wonder if you'll make it back safely. Good luck." The train quietly departed, quickly disappearing from sight. That train won't stop for a while. Walking back would be quite a challenge. After watching the train leave, I hurried home to pack my bags and left. I stayed with a friend I'd been discussing divorce with. Henry's barrage of messages continued until they suddenly stopped. His phone must have died. He often forgot to charge it before bed, and it was only at 20% this morning. Portable battery chargers are essential. That was Henry's mantra. But his crucial portable battery charger was in my bag, along with his wallet. I left all the belongings he entrusted to me at home. He must be panicking by now, but that's not my concern. While planning my next steps with my friend, my mobile phone rang. The caller was unexpected. Jonathan, Henry's brother. "Leah, I'm sorry. Did something happen?" According to Jonathan, Henry's phone had run out of battery, and in his panic, he dropped it, shattering the screen. Unable to reach me, the desperate parents-in-law could only think of one person to call. So I got contacted, but all I got was, "Ask Leah for the reason." He seemed unwilling to say more. I told Jonathan everything about Henry and the parents-in-law without holding back. As I spoke, I could hear Jonathan's voice getting sharper over the phone from the other end. "Leah's making a fool of us. Tell her off, Jonathan." The in-laws were loudly insisting that Jonathan, with his way with words, would outtalk me. After I finished explaining, Jonathan snapped, "Hey, you scoundrel. Are you stupid? What, you scoundrel?" I had heard from Alia that when Jonathan gets really angry, he becomes intimidating with a high-handed tone. And since Jonathan only speaks sense, Henry and the parents-in-law can't retort when he gets like that. I could hear the in-laws arguing in the background, but I quietly hung up the phone. Henry was not content with the divorce. But after I conveyed through a lawyer that I wanted to divorce without any further contact, he reluctantly agreed, accompanied by Jonathan. Later, Jonathan told me that the parents-in-law had always been terrible moochers, disliked by neighbors and even school associates. When Henry returned to the ex-in-law's house, he quickly became the talk of the neighborhood, and now all three hardly ever go out. Henry's colleagues, not knowing what to say about the quick divorce, were treating him like a delicate subject. "I'm glad to cut ties with them after this incident," Jonathan told me with a laugh. The parents-in-law were known at the local supermarket for their outrageous behavior. "This is expiring soon, so give me a discount. It's a little damaged, so I'll take it for free." Jonathan expressed his long-standing embarrassment and disdain for his parents' behavior. Recently, Henry has been seen joining them, reflecting their blood connection. It turned out the parents-in-law were both gambling addicts, often skimping on food expenses, which explained their constant hunger and lack of money. When asked about the reason for my divorce, I can only say it was a difference in values. If anyone can tolerate such behavior, they must be incredibly broad-minded. It was just too much for me. I've continued working and even started a side job as a web writer after my travel blog caught a publisher's attention. I still travel, combining it with writing assignments. Solo travel seems to suit me best. Last month, I earned a decent income from writing, so I'm planning to take a vacation to a resort somewhere far for relaxation. I'm still only 30 years old, life is just beginning. After being disowned by my family over 8 years ago, they've reached out to invite me, my 27-year-old wife, and another female acquaintance for Christmas. I've received a mix of advice from friends, with one suggesting I turn to this online community for insight. I'm a 25-year-old male, the youngest of 4 kids born to my 52-year-old mom and 54-year-old dad. My siblings, whom I'll refer to as Michael, 31, male, Sarah, 28, female, and my twin brother Carl, 25, male, all excelled in physical sports. My dad was a star basketball player at Editsu School. My mom played volleyball. Michael excelled in soccer, Sarah in softball, and Carl was the star running back on the football team. I, on the other hand, showed an early interest in archery, which my family regarded as a wimpy sport. They seldom attended my events, and I often had to plead for their presence. Between the ages of 14 and 16, I participated in around 20 archery tournaments, while my parents only showed up to one. Though I wasn't neglected, they were emotionally distant, leaving me feeling overshadowed by my siblings. When I tried to address this, they labeled me an attention seeker. However, my disownment wasn't related to these issues. At 15, I began dating Amy, who was also 15 at the time. We introduced her to my family, and they liked her. However, almost 2 years later, one of Amy's former friends revealed that she had been cheating on me with an unnamed guy. Confronting her, she confessed that it was my twin brother, Carl. She claimed her feelings for him had surpassed those for me. Enraged, I confronted Carl at home, resulting in a physical altercation where I punched him and knocked him out. Although my violent reaction was regrettable, it was the culmination of years of resentment toward him and my family. To avoid legal consequences, my family agreed not to press charges against me. Instead, I was sent to live with my estranged paternal aunt, who lived 2 hours away and was 48 years old at the time. Since then, I've had no contact with my immediate family. Initially challenging, I've managed to move forward with the support of my aunt and her 48-year-old husband, gradually letting go of the desire to mend the broken relationship with my family. I transferred to a different high school and eventually attended a university in my aunt's city, where I graduated as an electrical engineer. Later, I met my wife and married her. When it came time to plan our wedding, I considered inviting my estranged family, but I decided against it to avoid any potential drama. My wife and I purchased a house an hour away from my aunt's place, and we were blessed with a daughter about a year ago. Recently, I received a Facebook message from my parents expressing a desire to reconnect over Christmas at their house. I told them I'd think about it as I might have other plans, but promised to provide a clear answer soon. In the meantime, both Michael and Sarah sent me friend requests on social media, which felt rather strange. My wife, who is 2 months pregnant, suggested that if I chose to go, she and our daughter would spend Christmas at her father's house to avoid unnecessary stress. I agreed with her, considering her well-being. My dilemma is whether to go and attempt to reconcile with my family or not. I'm torn on what to do. On one hand, it's possible they feel remorse for what they did to me and want to apologize. On the other hand, there's the fear that if I go, they might pressure me to apologize to Carl, something I'm not willing to do. Any advice on this matter would be greatly appreciated. Top advice before reading the update. I think you should go another time, spend Christmas with your wife and child. Visit your family at a less stressful time to see if they have any ulterior motives. It might just be about them wanting to see their grandchildren and not necessarily about you, which would be hurtful to you. Yeah, I agree. Go another time. I was thinking the same thing. It could be related to the grandkids. Spend Christmas with your wife and child. Christmas is too big of an event to meet them. Also, please update us. I can't get this post out of my head. I can't imagine a parent kicking out their child who was betrayed by their other child. They might want to reconnect due to money or their grandchild. I don't know, but it's weird that even his siblings texted OP. I hope it's for good reasons, though. I wouldn't consider spending Christmas away from my pregnant wife for them. Maybe I'm missing something, but why choose Christmas to reach out? They could have contacted me at any time and given me the chance to choose a convenient time to reconnect. They're the ones trying to mend things, so their timing seems odd to me. I personally wouldn't go unless you truly want them back in your life. The situation seems fishy to me. It's possible they found out about my successful child and are now attempting to heal the family image to avoid looking like they abandoned their son years ago. It feels like a trap. I noticed they didn't open with any remorse or sign of an apology. They might want something from me: money, free work, an organ, or access to my children. Or maybe they just want to appear good to their friends. I'm not saying don't go, but keep your expectations low. Be prepared for them to ask me to do something for them in order to reconcile properly and have a quick exit strategy ready. As a parent, I can't fathom going no contact with one of my children for 8 years, especially after the other child did something so cruel to them that they had to resort to hitting them. It's inconceivable to me. I would understand if my son hit his brother under such circumstances. We're all human, and moving past the fact that they abandoned me and turned their backs for 8 years is my choice. Personally, I'm not sure if I could. If I can't or don't want to see them again, I doubt anyone would blame me. If they do blame me, they don't know the full story. And if they do know the full story and still blame me, they're not worth my time either. Now for the update. I wanted to post earlier, but some things got in the way. 2 days after Christmas, my wife began experiencing unbearable pain in her abdomen area. She could hardly stand on her 2 feet. Her sister and I rushed her to the hospital, where we learned that my wife had suffered a miscarriage and that the fetus had to be removed right away. The worst part for me was explaining to my wife what had happened. Due to complications surrounding the operation, my wife had to stay in the hospital for 2 more days. I've been trying to stay strong for my wife and daughter, but honestly, I'm struggling right now. As for the updates on the original post, most of you who commented on the same day advised me not to spend Christmas with them due to the significance of that holiday. I agreed with the advice and decided to spend the rest of the holidays with my wife. When I texted my family, stating my decision, I expected them to argue with me. Surprisingly, they responded by saying they respected my opinion and looked forward to seeing me after the holidays. Curiosity got the best of me, and I started digging into my family to understand why they had reached out after all these years. I found out that Michael is a corporate lawyer working for a major company in our hometown, married with 2 daughters. Sarah, on the other hand, appeared to be married to a doctor and had a son. 8 years ago, she was studying to be a nurse. My friend, whose parents were friends with mine, informed me that Sarah had divorced her first husband, the one she was dating 8 years ago, due to mail fraud. Carl, my twin, married Amy right after high school, and they have 2 kids. I couldn't pinpoint their exact occupations, but the fact that they bought a big house last year suggested they were financially stable. My dad seemed to be going through a midlife crisis, while my mother was heavily involved in the wellness community. I tried to analyze why they might want to reconnect. One possibility was money, but considering my siblings' financial stability, that seemed unlikely. Another suggestion was organ donation, although it didn't make sense given that Carl, my likely match as my twin, was seen skiing in a Facebook post just a week before Christmas. Then there was the matter of my daughter. They might be reaching out to have a relationship with her. Although she wasn't their first granddaughter, I suspected they found out about her through my wife's public Facebook account. My next step was to contact my estranged aunt, the one who took me in, and inform her about the situation. She explained to me why my grandparents had disowned her. After college, she came out as bisexual and started dating her girlfriend, leading to immediate dissownment. However, about 4 years ago, my grandpa began to reconnect, and recently, he had been inquiring about me, my life, marriage, and whether I had kids. My aunt's response was swift and confrontational. She directly challenged my grandpa for his sudden interest in my life, particularly after he had supported Carl for his actions. That's when the whole situation took a surprising turn. Grandpa explained that he believed I deserved to be estranged because, according to him, I had cheated on Amy with one of her close friends. He viewed cheating as a grave offense due to his religious beliefs. According to my family's version of events, the friend who I allegedly cheated with confessed to Amy, who then sought comfort from Carl and Sarah. When I learned about this, I confronted Carl and Sarah, attacking them brutally. Sarah, who had attempted to mediate between me and Carl, was unharmed during the confrontation. Hearing this revelation from my aunt left me in shock. I couldn't fathom the depths of their animosity, leading them to concoct such a terrible lie about me. Later, my aunt disclosed the whole truth to Grandpa, who was utterly shocked as he had always believed Carl to be a good kid. Grandpa then demanded my aunt to provide my phone number, but she refused. I eventually uncovered the real reason my parents and siblings had reached out to me. It turned out Grandpa had given them an ultimatum. Either they apologize for their past mistreatment and invite me to the family Christmas dinner, or they would be cut off from his vast fortune. He was a multi-millionaire, and their financial greed motivated their sudden interest in reconciling. Instead of seeking genuine reconciliation for their past wrongdoings, they were driven by selfish motives. After learning the truth from my aunt, I decided to cut all ties with them. Why should I respond to people who only valued me for the potential inheritance they could gain? In my eyes, they were all dead to me. I had a supportive wife to care for, a family that respected and loved me, and supportive in-laws who were there for us. However, the story didn't end there. 3 days after New Year's Eve, I received an unexpected call on my work phone from an unknown number. Despite being accustomed to such calls due to my career, I picked up, only to hear my grandfather's voice on the other end. He must have obtained my number from my company's website. Surprisingly, his first words were an apology for not attempting to contact me over the past 8 years. He expressed his apologies for missing significant milestones in my life, such as my graduation, wedding, and the birth of my daughter. Frankly, I hadn't been particularly close to him before, so his decision to cut me off financially didn't affect me deeply. As our conversation continued, he revealed his disgust for the rest of my family and stated that he was cutting them off as well, adding me to the list. I found myself conflicted about this news. While the money would undeniably be helpful, I didn't want him to manipulate the situation to force a relationship between me and my daughter. Our conversation lasted about half an hour, during which I began to think that perhaps I could build a genuine connection with my grandpa. However, my feelings changed abruptly when he made a comment that infuriated me. He expressed disappointment that my daughter hadn't taken the family name. To provide some context, after marrying my wife, we discussed using her last name for our future children due to legal constraints preventing me from adopting her name. We made this decision together as a couple. At that moment, I couldn't contain my anger and let loose on my grandpa, labeling him as a senile old man and hurling hurtful words. I made it clear that I never wanted him to contact me again. The audacity of his comment, considering what I had gone through, was beyond infuriating. I resolved not to let him use any potential inheritance to control me. Even if I received the money, my plan was to donate it to a local charity. However, given his history of empty promises, this outcome seemed unlikely. The past few weeks had been incredibly challenging for me. My wife had taken measures to protect our privacy by privatizing her Facebook account, and my in-laws had done the same. How my estranged family planned to contact me remained a mystery, although I suspected they might resort to extreme measures, perhaps even hiring a private detective. As far as I knew, they didn't have information about where I currently lived, but one could never be too certain. I've considered getting a restraining order, but it's complicated given the presence of lawyers in the family. I didn't get the chance to answer some questions from my last post before it was inexplicably deleted. I'll try my best to respond to any questions over the next day or two, but after this, I won't be using the site for a while. Thank you all for your advice, and I wish you the best in this new year. I am profoundly sorry for your loss, OP. I can't even begin to fathom the pain you and your wife must be enduring. Your family's behavior is beyond belief. Their audacity knows no bounds. They don't deserve any more of your time and energy. Forget about them. I genuinely hope they don't bother you anymore, allowing you to focus on your family at home. Thank you for taking the time to update us. Please accept my condolences. I hope your wife recovers soon. Your family has faced some difficult weeks, but don't let these people get to you. Regarding your grandpa's comments about the last name, at least the truth is out, exposing their true colors. Let your grandpa keep the money if it comes your way before you make any decisions. Take your time and think it over calmly. You've chosen wonderful people as your family, your wife, daughter, and in-laws. They are the ones who truly matter. The rest of them can go to hell. I'm sorry for all you've been through and the loss of your child. Remember, you have a family that loves and supports you. You are wanted and cherished by them, even if your parents and siblings don't see it. Please seek professional support and help for yourself and your wife. You've been through a lot, and it's crucial to have the right support. As for the situation with your granddad, it might have convinced him that your aunt's claims were false, especially since they tried to portray you as unstable. While you had every right to be offended, you may have acted impulsively. I understand you've been through a lot, and this might have been the final straw for you. It's just a different perspective to consider. Sending you love and strength. I genuinely hope your wife gets better soon, and I hope the new year brings positive changes for you. At the end of the day, how your granddad perceives you shouldn't matter. A relationship based on money isn't genuine. This might affect the relationship your aunts and grandpa have, but truthfully, they never really had a meaningful relationship to begin with. My older brother, a 30-year-old male, pursued higher education and later worked as an accountant in the city. Meanwhile, I, a 27-year-old male, started working for my dad as a plumber at the age of 15. I attended college to obtain qualifications in plumbing and gas. Around the time the pandemic began, my brother moved back from the city and joined my dad, who who was 55 years old at the time, in our family plumbing business. Unfortunately, my dad's health had deteriorated due to asbestosis, rendering him unable to work effectively. Despite his declining health, he continued to work alongside me on Fridays, even though I had taken over the business operations for the past 2 years. During the pandemic, we faced challenges initially, but we managed to bounce back. We expanded our business, now operating 50 vans, each with one qualified and one trainee plumber. However, last month, my dad announced his decision to step down from the business due to his health. To my dismay, he handed over the business to my brother and asked me to relinquish my role as the acting CEO. This decision deeply upset me, especially considering my long-standing dedication to the business. In the beginning, it was just my dad and me, as my brother had no interest in joining the family business, dismissing it as unworthy of his time. Now he was suddenly the boss, despite lacking knowledge of our trade. I confronted my dad about his choice, but he justified it by pointing out my brother's family responsibilities and university education. Many of our employees were also unhappy with this decision, expressing their intention to leave if I did. Faced with this situation, I decided to leave the family business and start my own. Despite the hurtful messages and criticisms I received, I expressed gratitude to those who supported me. My plan was to reach out to our large clients, hoping to take over projects that had been postponed due to the pandemic. I also had the support of 20 colleagues willing to work with me. With my savings from the past 12 years, I believed I had enough to start my own business and stand on my own feet. Despite the challenges, I was determined to make my new venture successful, although I couldn't help feeling guilty about competing with my family. You shouldn't have to endure this injustice. They not only took the business away from you, but also from all the loyal employees who don't want to work under an inexperienced CEO. It's not just about you, Hall. It's about everyone affected by this decision. Your father could have split the business 50-50, with your brother handling the accounting side and you managing production. I would suggest offering this solution to your father. If he refuses, I would advise cutting all contact and blocking relatives. In your shoes, I would start my own business and never look back. Your brother turned his back on the family business while you poured your heart and soul into building it. Honestly, I thought your brother's return would unite us all into one big family company. It's heartbreaking that your father allowed this to happen, especially the significant pay cut you had to endure. This clearly shows how he values you compared to your brother. I am truly sorry for what you're going through. I hope you find the strength to run your brother's business out of the market. Thank you for your support. The most difficult part is that my brother agreed to the pay cut. I was still earning a decent wage, but it felt like a betrayal. I'd always believed my father would divide the business between us, not leave me on the sidelines after everything I did to build it. Now for an update. I want to make it clear that I don't intend to start a business with the purpose of destroying my brother. Despite my anger, I've invested almost 13 years in this business, and I don't want to see anyone lose their job or witness the downfall of the company. It's currently 5 a.m. in England, and your support has been invaluable. I plan to talk to my father around 8 a.m. I'll take him out for breakfast to have an honest conversation. I'm not sure if I'll get the answers I seek, but I love my family and want my future kids to know them. I'll update you all after today's events. Second update. As I mentioned in one of the comments, I believe my family has found my post, and they confirmed it this morning when I arrived at my parents' house. My mom greeted me with tear-streaked eyes, and my dad and I went out for breakfast to talk. He didn't utter a word during the drive there. Upon our arrival, and then again on the way back, he asked if we could pull over to talk. It was the first time I had ever seen my dad cry. When I confronted him, asking why he had done this to me, he confessed he didn't know. I pressed him, and he finally revealed that he felt he owed it to my brother for not being there for him as much as he was for me during our upbringing. There were moments my brother needed him, but we were always working. I couldn't fathom it. After 12 years of relentless dedication, this was his justification. I told my father that I had invested half my life working for the business, And now he was sidelining me just because my brother had returned. It hurt me in ways I couldn't express. To my surprise, he wasn't angry when he discovered the post I had shared. Instead, he seemed remorseful. He admitted that my mother was devastated after reading the comments about how badly they had treated me. She believed I would never talk to them again. My dad acknowledged that he should have split the business between us, realizing that it would require both of us to keep progressing. He apologized for never expressing how proud he was of everything I had achieved. He understood my brother would never agree to a 50-50 arrangement. He pleaded for me to return, saying my brother would need me, but I replied that it was no longer my concern. I tried to make it work for 3 weeks after my demotion and pay cut, but my brother refused to listen, dismissing my expertise, so I left. My dad broke down, confessing that he had torn the family apart and regretted what he had done. I couldn't fathom why it took him so long to realize my value in the company. In the third update, I had several successful Zoom calls with clients, and they informed me they would be sending proposals for upcoming work. Fortunately, the start dates didn't clash, a concern that had weighed heavily on my mind. 3 of my experienced colleagues had left my previous workplace and chose to join me voluntarily, an affirmation that touched me deeply. At this point, I had everything I needed to start my new business, 3 vans, and the tools I had amassed over the years. Then, my father called and invited me over for dinner. Uncertain but hopeful, I accepted, thinking it might be a step in the right direction. When I arrived, my entire family was present. The atmosphere was tense. My mother avoided eye contact, and my brother acted as if I didn't exist. My dad asked both my brother and me to join him in his office. He began questioning when I would return to the company, stating that they needed me back early Monday morning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I told them both that I wouldn't be returning, that I had started my own business. I questioned my brother, asking what he meant by we, considering he was the one who had been given the business. My brother lost his temper, demanding to know why I would leave if I truly cared about the company. I didn't hold back, expressing my frustration. I reminded him that I had dedicated 12 years of my life to make the company successful, just like him. Unlike him, I didn't seek all the glory, and I wouldn't allow myself to be treated poorly. I told him to leave so I could talk to Dad. I confronted my father, asking him about his apology earlier in the day and why he expected me to return despite everything. He couldn't meet my gaze. I said my goodbyes to my cousins, nieces, and nephews and walked out. I spent about 3 hours writing, finding solace before returning here to share my thoughts. I want to express my gratitude to everyone for the personal messages, comments, rewards, and all the encouraging words. I'll try to respond to everyone, but I'm exhausted and will likely fall asleep. In the 4th update, it's been a while since I last shared. I've had a lot going on in the past few weeks. The new business is thriving. We have plenty of work and are making good money. At the year's end, I plan to expand, and I couldn't be happier about that. My fiancé and I are overjoyed. She's busy planning our dream wedding, although she wants me to wear a suit. I insist on my kilt. Waking up next to her every day brings me immense happiness. She's been my rock through everything. Regarding my family, my father and brother still refuse to talk to me. They declared they won't attend our wedding, even though they haven't been invited. My mother contacts my fiancé, asking about wedding details but won't talk to me. On the brighter side, my fiancé's family has been incredible, helping with the lawsuits, assisting with wedding preparations, and much more. I am deeply thankful for their support. Other members of my family have backed off, apologized, and expressed a desire to make amends for the hurtful things that were said. My fiancé and I have decided to have our wedding in November. After we're married, we plan to try for children. We're both excited about becoming parents. The next story revolves around my business and the decision not to split control equally between my children. I'm a 65-year-old electrician from Germany, looking forward to settling down, traveling with my wife, and spoiling our grandchildren for the rest of our lives. I have built up a small business with 23 employees. My son, Alexander, who is 36 years old, will take control of it. I also have two daughters whom I am proud of. Laura, 34, has a master's degree in biochemistry, and Marie, 30, is a middle school teacher in mathematics and sports. Recently, I shared my plan of family gathering. Laura was supportive, but Marie accused me of favoritism, which I denied. I explained that Alexander had worked with me for 17 years, starting as a trainee and eventually earning his master's license as an electrician. He has demonstrated passion, dedication, and leadership, training 7 of our employees along the way. My daughters were offered opportunities to work with me during school holidays, but they pursued their own careers, which my wife and I supported financially and emotionally. I sought opinions on Reddit, asking if I was in the wrong. Most responses were in favor of my decision to leave the business to Alexander. People pointed out that hard work should be rewarded, emphasizing that he had invested his time and energy in the business and had helped make it successful. They agreed that leaving the business to him was a way to ensure stability for our employees and their families. Additionally, they acknowledged that it was my business and my money, and I had the right to decide who should inherit it. German law might have different views, but the consensus was that my choice was justifiable. In this situation, it's crucial for your uncle and cousins to consult a lawyer, as there might be legal costs involved in compensating his other children when he decides to pass the company to only one child. It's not being in a hole, it's just practical business sense. Marie may lack experience in this industry or running a business, which makes your son, Alexander, the most qualified candidate, given his 17 years of dedicated work with you. Marie's bitterness appears to stem more from Alexander's close relationship with you than from the handover of the business. It's worth considering that both Marie and Alexander had equal opportunities. They could have chosen to pursue a career as an electrician, but only Alexander followed through. It's unfair for Marie to resent the situation based on her own choices. As for your last story, about your inheritance, you're not the a-hole for not splitting your inheritance equally with your cousins. Your paternal grandmas will specify the distribution of her money among her grandchildren, not anticipating the number of children your dad and uncle would have. Your parents are right in asserting that it's your money, and you should be the one to decide how to handle it after gaining access to it. The accusations of selfishness are unwarranted, especially considering the unique circumstances that led to the uneven distribution. Your upbringing and your parents' financial decisions are entirely unrelated to the situation at hand. I had to buy my own car, while my cousins had theirs bought for them by their parents. My dad's aunt constantly fueled my uncle's belief that my dad was the favorite child, which left my uncle resentful. He now uses the fact that I'm receiving more money to support that idea. I refuse to split the money because it's rightfully mine. The inheritance was meant for the children of my dad, and it's not my fault that my parents had only one child. My parents taught me financial responsibility, and I plan to put most of the money into a lifetime ISA. I intend to use some of it to travel after university and invest the rest wisely. I'm not planning on squandering it all in one go. Furthermore, Connor and Olivia's shares are substantial, far more than most people inherit and more than many have access to in their early 20s. Connor has already spent most of his inheritance on partying, traveling, and cars, so I don't see why I should have to compensate for his choices. Regarding the messages I've received, I want to clarify that my grandma did not exclude my dad and uncle. She only left the money from her various bank accounts to the grandchildren. Her other assets, such as property, jewelry, art collection, and investments, were divided between them. To those who say I'm being selfish, I firmly believe that my decision aligns with my grandma's wishes. Imagine if the roles were reversed. Would they willingly share their inheritance? I don't think so. This is a fair, but not equal, situation. My grandmother was fair by splitting the money 50-50 between her son's descendants. It's their entitlement and not a matter of greed. Anyone questioning it can express their concerns at her grave.
On the day we were supposed to start our honeymoon, he surprised me by giving me papers that said he wanted a divorce. He said he was taking his whole family on the trip, and if I didn't like it, we could split up. Inside, I was furious. Okay, fine, I thought to myself. But remember, I'm still free. He looked shocked as I stood there feeling triumphant. My name is Emma. I'm 35 years old, and I work at a real estate company. I really enjoy my job and feel happy doing it. I'm lucky to have supportive colleagues, but in my personal life, I don't have any specific hobbies and I've never had a boyfriend. I felt a secret worry growing inside me. All my friends were getting married by the time they hit 30, one after the other. I was one of the few left who was still single. Plus, my younger colleagues were leaving our company one after another, and it hurt every time. Then, I met Brian through a friend's introduction. He was 2 years younger than me and had a smile that made me feel warm and protective. He didn't talk much but always listened to what I had to say when we needed to make decisions. He made me feel like my thoughts mattered. Since I had no experience with relationships before, I quickly fell for Brian's personality. Our relationship progressed smoothly. When I brought up the topic of marriage, he simply said, "Okay, let's do it." Marriage involves making lots of decisions: the wedding, the honeymoon, finding a new home to live in together. It's a huge event in a person's life, so I wanted us to decide things together. But no matter what decision we faced, Ryan always let me take the lead. He never shared his own thoughts. He just agreed with whatever I said. Brian's personality began to seem unreliable to me, and I started feeling unsatisfied with him. Another thing bothering me was my relationship with my mother-in-law. She was completely different from Brian, not easygoing at all. She never listened to my opinions and always imposed her own ideas on me. "Emma, when you get married, you'll quit your job and focus on taking care of the house, right? You're not getting any younger, you know. If you don't hurry, you might not be able to have kids. Brian is working hard, so as a woman, you should focus on the family. It's a wife's duty to support her husband." These were the first things she said to me when I went to greet her. The husband works outside and the wife takes care of the home. She clung to old-fashioned ideas like this. The truth is, I earn more money than Brian does. He doesn't seem to mind, and he's even told his parents about it, but his mother doesn't seem to approve. A woman who earns more than a man isn't charming. Maybe you can't do any household chores, can you? A wife should cook, do laundry, clean, and take care of her husband's health. Can you do that? She said, looking down on me. You're right, it's definitely different when it's your mother-in-law saying those things. While it's not something to boast about, I can handle all the household chores because I've been living alone for a long time, and I don't plan on quitting my job after getting married. I want to prioritize myself just as much as Brian. But when my mother-in-law criticized me, Brian didn't stand up for me. Instead, he just nodded along with her. That made me feel uneasy about relying on him for the rest of my life. But then again, Brian is younger than me. Maybe he'll become more dependable as he gets older. If this marriage doesn't work out, I might never get married at all. My mind is torn between anxiety and desires, stuck in an endless conflict. But time doesn't wait, even when I'm troubled. There are so many decisions to make for the wedding. Where to go for the honeymoon, arranging time off from work, and more. The to-do list keeps growing, and it's making me feel even more uneasy. I was juggling busy days, preparing for both work and marriage. One day, I talked to Brian about our plans. Considering our work schedules, we can only take a long vacation at this time. So should we have our honeymoon during this period? I asked. Yeah, that sounds good to me, Brian replied. Both of us had similar quiet periods at work, so this was our only chance for a long vacation. But there was a problem with the wedding. The venue I've always dreamed of is so popular that it's booked for over a year in advance. In that case, what do you think about having the honeymoon before the wedding? I checked, and some people do that. If we have the wedding first, it will be another 2 years before we can go on the trip. If you're okay with it, Emma, then I'm fine with it too, Brian said. I thought Brian wouldn't object, but he agreed so easily. It seemed like he was accepting all my opinions without any resistance. While I did want him to express his own thoughts a bit more, I figured it was better than facing opposition. So whenever I got the chance, I kept moving forward with the preparations for our honeymoon and wedding. In the end, we settled on going to Europe for our honeymoon. I debated until the last minute between Hawaii and Europe. Hawaii was close by, and I figured we could visit there another time. So I chose to explore Italy and France, enjoying the beautiful streets and delicious food. I also wanted to check out the stylish accessories and maybe buy some special tableware since it marked the start of our new life together. After considering various schedules and destinations, I finished all the paperwork about a month before the trip. By then, I was completely excited. It was going to be my first overseas adventure, and I couldn't help but feel thrilled. My mind was consumed with thoughts about Europe, from buying travel essentials to planning our activities there. Because of this excitement, any lingering dissatisfaction I had with Brian had disappeared completely. Just 1 week before our honeymoon, Brian suddenly brought up a conversation. I was puzzled by Brian's unusual request. He rarely asked me for anything, so I was curious about what it could be. Could it be related to our trip? Did he find a place he wanted to visit? I was filled with anticipation as I asked him, "What's wrong?" Brian innocently made his request, saying, "I want to go see Taylor when we're in Paris. Mom really wants to go there." I was taken aback. "Your mother-in-law?" "Wait, what do you mean?" I couldn't keep up with this sudden turn of events, but Brian seemed to think it was obvious. "Well, since everyone else is going, we'll all be together even during the trip, right?" "What do you mean by everyone?" "It's our honeymoon, so it's obvious that it's just you and me going." "But my mom thinks it's normal for the whole family to go," Brian explained. "First of all, I only made reservations for 2 people. You and me, Brian. The deadline for booking was 7 days ago. Today is the last day to register. Whether we go together or not, I only booked for 2 people, so it was impossible for the whole family to join. If you ask the travel agency, they might be able to sort something out," Brian suggested. I was stunned by Brian's statement when suddenly, the intercom in the house rang. On the screen, I saw my in-laws. Without any regard for my surprise, they entered the house with a load of bags. Ignoring my objections, my mother-in-law's eyes sparkled as she declared, "I thought I'd leave the luggage here since we're leaving soon. I'm so excited." Brian chimed in, "Just leave the luggage here," and began leading them into the room without asking for my consent. "Wait a minute." I tried to stop him urgently, but my mother-in-law shot me a sharp look. "What's the matter, Emma? I hope you're not suddenly saying you don't want to go together now." "I never agreed to go together in the first place," I retorted, but my mother-in-law paid no attention. "You heard it, she just said no, didn't you?" "But Brian always thought we would go together with you, right?" she asked, trying to flatter Brian. Brian simply replied, "Yeah," affirming her statement. Seizing on his agreement, my mother-in-law began to dismiss me. "It's normal for the husband's parents to go on the honeymoon. Don't you have common sense? I hope you won't ruin the trip with any unpleasant experiences since it's a special honeymoon. We want to make good memories, right? I'll make sure to teach you some common sense during this week before we leave. It's supposed to be a special honeymoon after all." I felt like everything was falling apart. My blood was boiling with frustration. "Mother-in-law, this is a honeymoon, you know. Normally, it's just supposed to be the husband and wife," I insisted desperately. If I listened to my mother-in-law's demands now, it would set a bad precedent for the future. I wanted to avoid that at all costs. However, my mother-in-law stubbornly refused to back down. Not only that, but she began to dismiss my concerns altogether. The husband's parents going on the honeymoon together is just common sense. I can't believe you don't want to be with us. I thought we were becoming a family, but it seems our ideas of common sense are different. You don't seem to like me, and nothing seems to match. How sad, she said, lowering her eyebrows in a fake manner. Her words, "how sad," seemed to have a hidden smirk behind them. I was convinced she was deliberately trying to trap me. That's how sure I was. Even Brian, without questioning, started blaming me based on my mother-in-law's words. "Emma, what's wrong with you? They're my parents. It's okay for us to go on the honeymoon together, right?" "It's not possible. We've already booked reservations for 2 people. Plus, I've never heard of families joining a honeymoon trip," I declared. Brian shouted angrily, as if looking for a fight. "I never realized you disliked my parents so much, Emma. That's enough, just leave for today," Brian said, looking at me as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. As he spoke, a wicked smile spread across my mother-in-law's face. Why does he always take his mother's side without even considering his spouse's opinion, especially at a time like this? I wished he would support my views. Before I could react to his words, I found myself pushed out to the entrance. Just before the door closed, I caught a glimpse of my mother-in-law's smug expression. Left outside, I felt powerless. Why am I being portrayed as the bad guy? Why does everything, even this special trip, have to be ruined? Frustration and sadness consumed me, and tears began to flow. A few hours later, I received a message from Brian. I want you to see if it's still possible for them to join the tour. If not, we'll cancel this trip and find a tour where all 4 of us can go. Please think rationally. If you reconsider, we can sort it out properly. I don't believe I'm in the wrong. It seems like there's no reason for you to apologize or respond. Brian hasn't contacted you since his last message, and it's likely he's upset too. Time passed, and the day of your honeymoon departure finally arrived. Despite feeling unable to enjoy it in your current state, you had spent a month preparing for this trip, so you couldn't refuse. As you were getting ready to leave, the intercom rang, and it was Brian coming to pick you up. You hadn't seen each other since the incident, so you didn't know how to act around him. His arrival indicated that he still intended to go on the trip, but strangely, he didn't have any luggage with him. Instead, he handed you divorce papers. After hurting my parents, you still planned to go on this trip, didn't you? He accused. I'm taking my whole family on this honeymoon. If you don't like it, let's get a divorce. My mom said it would be better that way, he added, thrusting the papers in front of you. In that moment, you finally saw his true colors. You had thought he would listen to you and prioritize your feelings, that he was a kind person. But it turned out he didn't have his own opinions, and he put his family before you. That's who Brian truly is. As I came to that realization, my feelings for him began to cool down. Even if I were to marry him, I couldn't see myself overcoming the challenges that lay ahead and becoming a family with his mother-in-law. It just seemed impossible. Determined, I pointed at the divorce papers in front of me and said, "Sure, but remember, I'm still single, you know." "Huh?" Brian exclaimed, clearly surprised by my words. "Single? What do you mean? Weren't you listening? We talked about going on the honeymoon but delaying the registration until the day of the ceremony. I made sure to get your permission, Brian. You didn't forget, did you? The marriage certificate is still in the drawer, and you even said, 'If you are fine with it, Emma, then I'm fine too.' That's right, divorce or not, we're not even married yet. There's no problem with going on the honeymoon with my maiden name." Maybe you remembered my words. Brian's expression suddenly changed. But then he turned red and raised his voice in frustration. "Are you out of your mind to give up on marriage just because of a honeymoon? Get a grip." I responded, matching Brian's intensity with my own strong voice. "This is the result of me being rational. I've been so desperate to get married that I couldn't see reality clearly. I don't think I can be happy marrying someone who doesn't listen to their future spouse's opinions and doesn't support them. I'd rather stay single for life. Thanks for making me realize that. Haste makes waste." I keenly felt that this saying was true. "Hey Emma, let's calm down and start over from scratch, okay?" He looked like he was about to cry. His pleading voice trembled. "But I won't be fooled anymore. I will break free from this guy." Without realizing it, I found myself shouting loudly at Brian. "If you're so desperate for a family trip, why don't you go with your family of 3? But in return, you'll have to plan everything from the tour reservations to the itinerary all by yourself. After always relying on others, it's about time you experience the difficulty yourself. If you think you can handle it, go ahead, you indecisive man." I pulled out the marriage certificate from the drawer and tore it to shreds in front of Brian. His mouth hung open in shock at the sudden turn of events. Overwhelmed by my determination, Brian was completely taken aback. "Do you understand how serious I am now? I refuse to have a future that's dark. It's over between us. Why don't you go back to your beloved mommy and cry to her, you mama's boy?" Leaving a stunned Brian behind, I slammed the front door shut. Given his demeanor, he might actually go cry to his mother. I could easily imagine that happening. Afterward, I contacted the tour company to cancel our reservations. Since it was a same-day cancellation, we were charged 100% of the fee. I billed Brian for the entire amount since he was the one who ruined our honeymoon. It felt like the right thing to do. Later, Brian blamed me for the failed marriage and spread rumors about it to those around us. However, it seemed that no one sympathized with him among our relatives and coworkers. Instead, he started to be seen as an unconventional mama's boy due to his past actions and was disliked by many. When I told my parents about the divorce, they were initially surprised but quickly accepted it. Marriage isn't the only source of happiness. As long as you're happy, Emma, that's what matters. I couldn't be more grateful for my mother's words. As a side note, since then, my hobby has become traveling. I felt it would be a waste to let long vacations go to waste, so I embarked on my first solo trip. Going overseas alone was a bit daunting, but I enjoyed a relaxing time in historic cities I had always wanted to visit. Wow, being alone is actually quite enjoyable. Thanks to the historical adventure trip, I've started to fully enjoy solo traveling. Whenever I have time off on my next break, I'm planning to embark on my next overseas trip. I've begun a life where I won't let myself be controlled by marriage alone. Why is the money we sent to Mom only $670? My husband shouts angrily. I had to stop sending more money. Look at what's left in your mom's account on this paper. I reply straightforwardly. My name is Penelope and I'm 42 years old. I work part-time at a supermarket. I have 2 sons, Ethan in 8th grade and Leo in 6th grade. My husband is Asher, who's 43 years old. Asher's mom, my mother-in-law, is 67 years old. Ever since Asher's dad passed away, my mother-in-law has been living alone. Even though she gets some money from a pension, it's not much. When my father-in-law died, we talked about it. He raised Asher, and I feel indebted to him. I figure he'll need more help in the future too. So I've decided to send her $335 every month as a sort of caregiving payment, I explain. They told us the house loan is paid off now. My late father-in-law left behind $200,000. As per his will, Asher, being his only child, agreed to give the entire amount to my mother-in-law. I thought maybe we could manage with that money. It's scary living without any income and seeing your savings shrink. My mother-in-law understands this too, so she suggested I give her a monthly allowance. It's more of a symbolic gesture, I add. But less than a year after we made that decision, my mother-in-law called in tears, sparking an argument about the allowance because of COVID. I can't afford to go to the cheaper supermarket, so I can't save any money, she says. COVID can be scary for some people, my husband acknowledges. Yeah, it's scary to go out. I agree. So if there's something you need, just tell me. I can pick it up from the specific store on my way home from work, I offer. But my mother-in-law insists that's not the problem. It's not just groceries, it's everyday items too. Oh, I understand now. It's not only food. Okay, I'll go to that store for everyday items as well. I promise. Honestly, do I have to spell it out for you? It's not just groceries and everyday items. It's things like hair dye to cover gray hair too, she shouts. In other words, she's saying, please don't make me explain so much. The allowance isn't enough. My husband, feeling guilty, says, I'm sorry, mother, and decides to increase it to $670 without asking me first. Wow, $670 is a lot of money. I couldn't hide my surprise at the decision made without asking me first. That's like all the money I earn from my part-time job. And soon, our older child will be taking entrance exams, and we can't skip sending them to cram school. I asked the store manager for more hours, but it's been hard to balance work and home. Mom, you're never home at night, my younger child complained. I'm sorry, sweetie. Mommy is working hard to earn money for us, I said, feeling guilty. Today, I made a really cool piggy bank at school and got praise for it. But I can't even talk about it now, he banged on the table. I'm sorry. I'll buy you the toy you wanted for your birthday. I promise I'll work hard for it, I reassured him, promising to buy the toy my second son wanted. Then my husband walked by, just wait a bit for the toy. Grandma is making sacrifices too. Mommy isn't working just for toys, she's working for Grandma, he said before leaving me feeling guilty. Even for our child's birthday gift, we were cutting back for my mother-in-law's sake. And the way he said it made me wonder, who was I really working for? My husband's words left me confused. Surprisingly, our younger child stayed and patted my shoulder. Mom, you're doing your best. Don't worry, Mom. I don't need the toy right away, my younger child reassures me. But that feeling of uncertainty returned when my mother-in-law called. "Did you get the envelope?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes," I replied. "You can probably guess what happened next. Indeed, today I received an envelope from my mother-in-law. When I opened it, I found a copy of a bank statement inside. I quickly checked the remaining balance. Huh. I was surprised and my voice slipped out unintentionally. $6. It's less than $10 now. Can you see it?" My mother-in-law seemed to understand that I had seen the contents of the envelope and her voice quivered with tears. "And now, with prices going up, I can't even afford to pay the electricity and gas bills," she sobbed. But I tried to keep talking while looking at the statement. "That's enough. All you do is tell me what to do and what not to do, going on about useless things and procrastinating. Last time, you talked about running errands for household items and groceries, but those were useless solutions. That's why I called at this hour. Asher, are you there? Take over for me." My husband had already come close during the phone conversation, and he said, "Mom, let me take over," as he took the receiver from me. Yeah, Asher responded. Then he exclaimed, "Oh no," letting her use up the entire inheritance, letting the balance drop below $10. "I'm sorry, I think this is definitely a misfortune for my humble parents." Yeah, I understand. So starting from next month, if I send $2,000 each month, will that be okay?" He blurted out suddenly. "What? $2,000? How could the allowance be that much?" I stood there in shock as I listened. After he hung up the phone, Asher shouted angrily, "Why is the allowance for Mom only $670? I told you it should be at least $670. I thought you had increased it." "But you see inside that envelope?" I tried to explain, but he interrupted me and continued, "I told you I owe her for raising me. In the future, she'll probably need more help. If you think of it as caregiving expenses, why is my mother in such a heartbreaking situation?" His voice grew louder as he expressed his frustration. I was already stretched to my limit. Even the $335 allowance was tough to manage. I thought increasing it to $670 was an achievement. I worked more hours at my part-time job to cope. I even learned to cook more affordable meals. I managed the household expenses with all those efforts, but it wasn't enough, and there were sacrifices. "I did it for my children, just like I do everything else," she scolded me abruptly, deciding on a $2,000 allowance without consulting me and without even considering how our allowances were being used according to my mother-in-law's bank statement. "Above all, I'm working for the sake of my sons, not for my mother-in-law." "That's enough," I said in a cold voice. I realized that when a person gets too angry, their voice becomes quiet. "What do you mean? It's fine. Are you getting defensive now?" My husband mocked me. I was no longer willing to yield to his words. After seeing a copy of that statement, I absolutely couldn't accept such a ridiculous proposal as a $2,000 allowance. I've had enough of a son who blindly believes and supports a money-seeking mother and grandmother. People who can't prioritize our family don't belong here. Get out. If you want to support your mother so badly, then go live with her. You can happily go to hell together. I firmly pushed my husband out the front door, then I walked him out. I shoved the envelope in his face. "I'll send your belongings back and you'll cover the shipping. Take a close look at the contents of your mother's bank statement, huh?" my husband asked, but I just closed the door with a laugh. Bang. "What's going on, Mom?" Hearing the commotion, our two children came downstairs. "Well, you two, your father said he wants to spend more money on you, and he asked Grandma to spend more too." I couldn't stand it any longer, so I explained to the children. "I see. If you decided this, Mom, it must be for the best for this house," my older child said. "I'll follow your lead," they added. "Well, that toy, I'll wait for it until I'm an adult, no matter how many years it takes," my younger son said, trying to cheer me up. "Thank you, my sons." 1 week later, my husband called out to me, "Help me." I responded coldly, "What about?" "Could you at least listen to my story?" he pleaded. "I know what you meant when you said to look at the statement. I can't believe after all this time that I know what that means," he stammered, but he kept talking, clinging to his speech. I had to hold back my laughter on the phone. "I can't believe that you would blindly trust your mother and then suggest such an outrageous proposal. I can't believe you're calling me now, wanting to get back together. You really have no idea how clueless you are, huh? That's just who you are. You question everything without realizing your own indecisiveness." You casually involve others and act surprised when it's pointed out, I said. Well, I suppose it wouldn't hurt to have one final conversation. I want to say those last words in person. It's important for the children and closure matters. I agreed to meet my husband in our house. Oh, and make sure to bring all of your mother's credit card statements, okay? I instructed. My husband and mother-in-law arrived, their lives undoubtedly in disarray. I thought this meeting would be a complete disaster. If you had just calmed down and looked at the statement, you would have figured it out. My husband insulted me outright. You ended up believing your mother, didn't you? I responded calmly. So, can you show me the statement? My husband placed the statement on the table with trembling hands, and as I looked at it, I asked, "What did you discover?" And then my mom, she used the money I sent her for electricity, gas, food. It wasn't just for living expenses, he confessed in a barely audible voice. It wasn't just for living expenses, was it? Actually, the other purpose was the main one, right? Please say it with your own mouth, I urged. She was a member of an escort club. I'll let my husband tell you himself, his withered confession accompanied by my mother-in-law's trembling lips. I was absolutely delighted, and I couldn't help but laugh. That's right. Your mother, whom you believed more than me, was a woman who spent money on male escorts while lying about not being able to pay the increased electricity and gas bills and came begging to her own son. I exclaimed with glee. The statement showed transactions at an escort club named Romeo, followed by expenses at high-end restaurants and bars. She was spending over $40,000 a month. After a good laugh, I took a sip of cold water to calm down, then continued speaking. Even at nearly 70 years old, how could she pick up a young, handsome guy at an escort club and take him to all those fancy places? I don't understand how she ended up in such a situation, begging for money at her own son's house. I'm really curious if she ended up addicted or something like that, I remarked, poking at her wounded pride. Unexpectedly, my mother-in-law spoke up, saying, "He told me he feels love for the princess who gives him an allowance. He even gives me presents." This made me spit out the water I had been drinking in surprise. I couldn't help but giggle and laugh. Referring to a 67-year-old as a princess is quite something, isn't it? Well, some people fall for words easily, like my mother-in-law becoming like a man's personal ATM. So they'll keep saying those words, won't they? I took another sip of water. If you're giving an escort guy an allowance, he must be withdrawing a considerable amount, right? It wasn't my mother-in-law who visibly shuddered, huh? The one who reacted was actually my husband. I placed a piece of paper on the table. It was fun meeting you today. I love you. Please request me again. Read the business card with a handwritten message. Huh? My husband stared at the business card on the table. I didn't expect to be kicked out of the house all of a sudden. I didn't even tidy up my own room, did I? He stammered. I found your stuff while I was cleaning up your things. Even the strange money deductions. It all makes sense now. Yes, that's right. So it's not just my fault. My mother-in-law shouted hoarsely. There was a glass of lemonade in front of her, but she hadn't touched it at all. It might be expected, since she had been continuously blamed. However, as the target of blame shifted, she attempted an unexpected turnaround. My husband's voice trembled as he reacted to this blow. But because I've been laughed at this much, am I the only one being ridiculous? Isn't that so unfair? My husband retorted. Huh? No, just wait a minute. You're making me spend this much money, and now you're saying this? That's my line. Asking for money because your allowance isn't enough. I can't believe you're into escort girls too. Like parent, like child, must be an annoying way to spend money. It's over now, isn't it? Both of you are done. At my words, both my husband and mother-in-law had no words left. Hey kids, come down here for a sec. I called up to the second floor. The two kids came down. I need to talk to you about something serious. Mom and I have decided it's best if we split up because Dad and Grandma have been using a lot of money selfishly. I explained honestly. Dad has been giving money to another woman, and Grandma has been spending a lot on a younger man. They're asking for even more. My husband tried to stop me from saying it in front of the kids, but I felt they needed to know the truth. The older child spoke up, agreeing that Dad shouldn't hide things. They pointed out how Dad said there wasn't enough money for toys while spending it on other people. The younger one added that their older sibling probably needed money for tutoring. That's right. I want to save money for your future, not spend it on strangers, I said firmly. Hearing this, the older child said, then it's goodbye from us too. The younger one agreed, saying they could manage without toys. They both thought it was wrong for Dad to spend money on someone else instead of us. In the end, it was clear that I had to cut ties with both my husband and my mother-in-law. Because of my divorce from my husband and mother-in-law's extravagant spending, I received a significant amount of alimony. Sadly, they continued their reckless habits, and I could see the consequences coming. Eventually, they hit rock bottom, accumulating debts so severe that they had to give up their house. Despite having to pay alimony and child support, they seemed unable to manage their finances wisely. I refused to give them any leeway. They need to fulfill their obligations entirely. I've taken up part-time work to support us. Although we can't afford many luxuries, the three of us are making ends meet decently. It's not extravagant, but I'm determined to do everything I can for my children. My hope is to continue living peacefully with the three of us in the future.